The Force is an endless ocean of energy that can cradle or consume, depending on how it is touched in its calmest currents. The light side soothes, heals and restrains in its deepest trenches. The dark side seethes with passion, fear and hunger, waiting in silence for those who dare to reach too far. In peaceful ages, the Jedi gazed upon this ocean and chose stillness. They taught that desire leads to fear, and that fear leads to suffering. But what happens when the desire for peace becomes a fear of change, when the guardians of balance grow so afraid of turmoil that they begin to fear emotion itself? Over time, that fear hardens, it becomes control, then repression, and eventually it calls forth those who refuse to be contained. This is the story of those rebels against the light, not as monsters in the shadows of a child's nightmare, but as a long unbroken tradition of beings who chose a different path through the Force. The Sith, for thousands of years, they walked the edges of that galactic ocean, reaching into the dark where others would not. Some were conquerors, some were philosophers, some were tragic figures pulled under by currents. They thought they could command tonight. Their history unfolds not as a barrage of battles, but as a slow, quiet procession, a timeline spoken in whispers from the first red-skinned Sith species on Korriban with their ancient tombs and somber rituals to the cold, careful design of the Rule of Two, hidden behind the politics of the Republic and the Empire. What followed was not a single war, but a rhythm of rise and fall, an empire born in exile, shattered in fire, and reborn in secrecy again and again. This journey will move in order, step by measured step, from the forgotten valleys of Korriban to the throne rooms of Darth Sidious and Darth Vader. Each era will pass gently the great hyperspace war, the age of Naga Sadow and the illusion-haunted fleets, the distant schemes of Darth Revan and the Starforge, the quiet cruelty of Darth Bane crafting a future in which only two Sith would shape events from the shadows. There will be no sudden shocks, no frantic clashes, only calm recounting each conflict described as if seen from far above. Distant storms on the surface of that vast ocean, while the listener drifts safely beneath the waves. Now the stars can be allowed to drift past. In silence, breaths can slow, eyes can close, and the centuries will roll by, one after another, from the first whispers of the Sith language in Korriban's red dust to the final echo of lightning over Endor. What they found there would change everything, and that is where the timeline begins, a galaxy. Before the Sith, placing darkness in the wider timeline. The timeline begins far above the familiar stars of the films, far beyond the Clone Wars, the Empire, and the Rebellion. In the dating system of galactic historians, every event is measured against a single moment: the Battle of Yavin, the destruction of the first Death Star. Everything before that point is labeled BBY, before the Battle of Yavin. Everything after is ABY, after the Battle of Yavin. In this quiet journey, the story of the Sith opens not hundreds, but tens of thousands of years before that battle. Long before the Skywalkers, long before Palpatine hid his dark power in the Senate chamber over time, the dates will drift forward. 25,000 BBY, 10,000 BBY, 5,000 BBY. Each era, another step along a very long corridor, leading toward the movie era, toward a throne room above Endor, and the last lightning of the old Sith tradition for thousands of years. In those early ages, the Jedi Order and the Galactic Republic believed themselves to be the main authors of history. The Republic charted hyperlanes, raised fleets, signed treaties. The Jedi traveled in calm serenity, guardians of peace and justice in their own telling. They were the ones who would shape the course of the galaxy. Yet in the shadows of that narrative, another current moved unseen. The Sith rose, fell, and returned again and again, leaving scars that... Official records tried to smooth away the popular image of the Sith in later centuries, became simple, almost theatrical, hooded figures, hurling dark side lightning, cackling over fallen enemies, but the story of their beginning is quieter and far more unsettling. It does not start with demons from beyond the stars. It begins with Jedi philosophers and seekers questioning the boundaries of the light side, asking whether the Force was meant to be restrained, whether passion and emotion could be harnessed rather than denied. What followed was not immediate war, but debate, meditation, and slowly hardening lines inside the Order itself. In that sense, any history of the Sith must begin as a history of the Jedis. The Sith are not an outside infection that crept in from some unknown region. They are a fracture that grew from within the crystal of the Jedi Order, a hairline crack formed by disagreements over power knowledge and the proper way to engage with the dark side. When that crack finally split it, hurled dark Jedi into exile, and what they found there would change everything ahead, lies the long arc of that fracture, from the first ideological schisms to open conflict, the 100-year darkness, and the exile of the Dark Jedi, then the rise of a true Sith Empire on Korriban and Zeost, the Great Hyperspace War that nearly consumed the Republic, the Great Sith War, and the Jedi Civil War. Under Revan and Malak, for the next 1,000 years and more, the pattern will repeat until at last Darth Bane's rule of two carries the Sith into secrecy and toward the age of the films, Seeds of Dissent, when Jedi curiosity turned toward shadow. For thousands of years, the Jedi would be remembered as serene guardians of peace. But their earliest generations were something more uncertain and more dangerous. They were explorers of the Force in all its aspects, wandering philosophers who mapped mysteries long before doctrine hardened into unbending rule. The story of those first Jedi is not one of simple light side purity. They studied luminous healing and calm insight, yet in the same breath examined battle meditation, mind influence, and the raw storms of emotion that surge through the Force. To them, knowledge itself was sacred, even when that knowledge brushed against the dark side in forgotten temples and on distant worlds. They catalogued powers that later ages would only whisper about. Over time, however, caution became fear. Early councils watched comrades vanish into obsession, consumed by visions or broken by contact with ancient Sith relics. In response codes were refined archives sealed, and entire branches of Force study were branded forbidden. What followed was a quiet narrowing of acceptable thought, a belief that safety required firm walls around curiosity. Around these walls, tension began to grow. Some Jedi looked at a galaxy filled with Sith warlords, Mandalorian crusades, and resurgent dark empires and asked whether restraint was truly wisdom or simply weakness. Their argument was simple: if the dark side was part of the same cosmic field that bound the galactic tapestry together, then refusing to understand it might leave the Order blind in its most desperate hours. These were not monsters at first, but scholars and warriors who believed the Council's fear limited their potential to protect others. They experimented in secret with techniques drawn from half-erased scrolls, Sith alchemy that could strengthen armor or twist metal at a molecular level, life manipulation that promised accelerated healing, or, in darker moments, the bending of another's will, aggressive combat forms designed to end conflict in a single, overwhelming strike. Initially, such efforts were quiet, a meditative circle on Ossus, pushing battle meditation a step further, a healer on distant Arcania, nudging the boundary between repair and control. Yet success bred confidence, and confidence bred pride. Some began to see themselves as pioneers, unshackled by timid elders, convinced that only they had the courage to wield every aspect of the Force. From these fault lines came the first great schisms long before, the 100-year darkness. There were smaller breaks, philosophers who walked away, masters quietly censured, promising knights reassigned to remote sectors. Each incident seemed contained, but together they carved channels for more open defiance, until at last movements emerged that would lead directly toward the so-called Second Great Schism, when arguments over the dark side no longer ended in debate, but in drawn blades. In the end, curiosity alone was never the true danger. It was curiosity fused with pride and amplified by the intoxicating rush of unchecked power that turned study into sedition, The moment was approaching when one group of Jedi would decide that the Council's limits were not merely misguided, but illegitimate, and the choice they made next would shape every war that followed. The second great schism, philosophy, becomes rebellion. From that moment, the arguments inside the Jedi Order stopped being harmless philosophy and began to harden into lines that could no longer be crossed around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. Those debates over the nature of the Force shifted from quiet meditation halls to formal councils and closed-door inquiries. What began as questions about balance and emotion became a struggle over who had the right to define the light side itself, the Council or the individual Jedi, standing alone with the Force over time. Small circles of like-minded Jedi coalesced around a new conviction, true mastery. They claimed demanded more than serenity. It demanded passion. They argued that the Force responded most intensely when a Jedi embraced powerful emotion, pain, anger. Even the sharp edge of suffering in battle, they pointed to moments when desperate knights had drawn on fear to save worlds and asked if that power was truly evil or simply misunderstood. The story of this movement was not framed as rebellion in their own minds, but as necessary evolution in the archives. These dissidents uncovered older, harsher traditions, glimpses of worlds such as Korriban and Zeost, where ancient species had once shaped the dark side into weapons and rituals. They studied accounts of force storms and alchemy and concluded that the Order had buried entire branches of knowledge to keep the galaxy comfortable. What followed was a quiet but relentless campaign of persuasion. In training yards and starship corridors, they whispered that the Council feared power more than it feared injustice, that restraint had become a chain. As tempers rose in formal sessions, the tone of the debate changed expectation, suggested that Jedi would submit to the Council's verdict. Instead, some simply stopped attending certain convocations. Then they began to meet elsewhere, in unused meditation chambers, on remote outposts, and in the shadowed corners of temple gardens. Those gatherings shifted from discussion to demonstration. Hidden experiments in channeling rage through the Force produced terrifying results: shattered stone, twisted metal, and visions drawn from the darkest corners of the mind. The Council issued directives banning these practices, and the Republic passed narrow regulations on certain Force techniques. But defiance had already taken root. A growing number of knights and even some masters refused assignments that restricted their research. Some altered mission reports to conceal their methods. Others openly disobeyed orders in the field, claiming that local crises demanded the full spectrum of the Force, rather than the limited tools approved by Coruscant authority. The conflict was no longer theoretical, it was behavioral, and it was spreading. This escalation came to be known as the Second Great Schism. Not only a dispute about power, but a fundamental challenge to governance itself. The dissidents insisted that no council, no senate, no galactic charter could stand between a Jedi and the Force. They began to think of themselves as visionaries, forerunners of a future order that would shape destiny without apology. In hushed conversation, they spoke of the current Jedi as caretakers of a dying tradition, guardians of a light side dimmed by fear in spirit. They were already calling themselves something different, though no new name had yet been carved into temple stone. Their teachings elevated conflict as a crucible and suffering as a teacher. They sought worlds at the edge of Republic maps, places scarred by ancient wars where the dark side still clung to the soil. There they built hidden enclaves and laboratories. Far from Coruscant's oversight, each new convert deepened the rift. It was no longer a handful of rogue knights, but a true movement with its own doctrines, mentors, and clandestine strongholds. For the next 1,000 years, the galaxy would remember what came next as the 100-year darkness. But on the eve of that catastrophe, it still felt to many within the Order like a family argument that had simply gone too far. The scale of the break was easy to underestimate until entire task forces failed to report in, until whole sectors whispered of Jedi who wielded the Force with unrestrained fury. The schism had become open rebellion, and the first shadows of a new, darker tradition were beginning to fall. The 100-Year Darkness, a century of war in slow motion. Around 7,000 years before the Battle of Yavin, the Jedi finally gave this new reality a name: the 100-Year Darkness. It was not a poetic title, it was a diagnosis, a quiet admission that the Order itself had birthed a war so vast and so enduring that it would scar Jedi memory for thousands of years. Doctrine would be rewritten around it, meditations reshaped so that nothing similar could be allowed to bloom again over time. What had begun as scattered uprisings hardened into a sustained galactic conflict. The Dark Jedi who broke away did not simply wield anger in battle, they experimented, they probed at the edges of what the Force would tolerate through forbidden alchemy. They reached into the essence of living beings and twisted it. The story of their campaign is filled with worlds where native predators were reshaped into towering warbeasts, plated in unnatural armor, and driven by implanted hunger on some battlefields. The Jedi reported creatures that should not have existed, hulking silhouettes that absorbed blaster fire and kept advancing things with too many eyes, or none at all mouths, that screamed in voices that were once sentient. The dark side saturated these abominations until even veteran knights felt their composure waver. It was not only a war of fleets and sabers, it was a war against the very idea of life as the Jedi understood it. Yet the 100-Year Darkness did not burn hot and then fade. What followed was a century of conflict in slow motion. Generations were born under its shadow. Entire agricultural worlds knew the distant rumble of passing armadas better than they knew. Peace children grew up with stories of dark sorcerers who could call storms from clear skies or snuff the life from a forest with a gesture. The front lines shifted by degrees, not by sudden, decisive strokes for the Jedi. The emotional toll was relentless. Every report carried familiar names. Comrades once trusted, now leading assaults under a different banner. Councils that had debated philosophy together, now met only across battle lines. The realization settled in that the most dangerous enemies of the Order were not ancient monsters or invading empires, but its own fallen students, its own masters, who had decided that restraint was a weakness. There were quiet tragedies beneath the grand strategy duels, where a teacher faced a former Padawan in the ruins of a temple. Evacuations where civilians stared in disbelief at Jedi, fighting Jedi. The Order learned to fear not only defeat, but corruption. A single captured knight might return. Months later, changed eyes colder techniques, sharper, voice-echoing arguments first, heard in the halls of the temple. Eventually, the sheer scale of the devastation forced a grim clarity. Worlds were being bled-dry resources, consumed by a war that had no outside invader to blame. It was an internal wound left untreated. How long could a civilization survive such a slow hemorrhage? The answer would shape everything that came after, because the Jedi and the Republic began to accept that only a final confrontation could end this rebellion. The galaxy was drifting toward one last gathering of fleets and armies, a decisive clash that would determine the fate of the Dark Jedi and set the stage for what they would become next. Korbos, the final stand of the Dark Jedi. Despite the horror they inflicted, the Dark Jedi ultimately lost their war. The final confrontation came at the Battle of Korbos around 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin. This was the endpoint of the 100-Year Darkness, the moment when a century of scattered raids and brutal campaigns narrowed into a single system, a single world, and a single choice. Korbos itself was no shining battlefield. It was a bleak, remote mining world scarred by abandoned strip mines and jagged canyons. Its thin atmosphere and harsh winds made it an unlikely stage for history. Yet the last Dark Jedi chose it precisely for that reason. Far from major hyperlanes, difficult to approach and easy to fortify, in the shadows of its broken ridges, they dug in for a final stand. The story of their defense was not elegant strategy, but raw obsession. The Dark Jedi walked the native fauna through Sith alchemy, twisting beasts into hulking war creatures. Driven by the dark side, they drew in desperate settlers, mercenaries, and failed Jedi, promising power and freedom from the constraints of the light side. Entire ravines became nests of corrupted followers waiting behind crude barricades and fields of improvised traps around them. The Republic and the Jedi Order gathered everything they could spare. Fleets of warships ringed the system true. Transports descended through hostile skies, and ranks of Jedi Knights prepared for a campaign that might cost tens of thousands of lives. What followed was a slow, grinding assault, rather than a single dramatic charge. The Republic advanced trench by ridge, under constant attacks from mutated creatures and darkside storms. The Dark Jedi hurled lightning and terror across the battlefield. They shattered minds and bodies. They unleashed beasts that could tear through armored lines. Yet the combined might of the Jedi and the Republic did not break this time. Through clever tricks, it broke through sheer numbers, discipline, and grim determination. Jedi strike teams cut through the worst of the abominations, Republic artillery buried in entrenched positions under fire. Over time, the ring around the last stronghold tightened when the defenses finally collapsed. The surviving Dark Jedi were taken in chains, dragged from ruined bunkers and shattered temples, and brought before a joint council of Jedi Masters and Republic leaders there. In the aftermath of war, the victors faced a question that would shape everything that came after. Should these fallen Jedi be executed as war criminals or punished in another way that preserved the Order's ideals? The decision was framed as restraint, as mercy. Execution would be quick exile, would be slow and humiliating, and supposedly safer for the galactic community. In that chamber, the choice was made to cast the Dark Jedi out of Republic space, to send them into the unknown, rather than end their lives. No one in that moment imagined that this act of mercy would reshape galactic history. For thousands of years, their ships were prepared, their courses set toward uncharted regions, and the Republic turned away, believing the conflict finished. But what they found there would change everything, and the true Sith had not even been born yet. Mercy in chains, the exile of the defeated Dark Jedi. In the quiet that followed the war, the victors gathered to decide the fate of those who had tried to overthrow the very foundations of the Jedi Order. Power had been claimed in the name of the dark side, and then broken on the battlefield. But what happens to fallen conquerors when the fighting ends? The answer in this moment was exile around 6,900 years before the Battle of Yavin Jedi Masters, and Republic officials met in a somber convocation on Coruscant. The chamber was not filled with shouts. It was filled with exhausted arguments. Some senators demanded execution, insisting that the Dark Jedi would always return to conflict. Others urged restraint, warning that mass death carried its own stain on the light side. The Jedi Council stood between these positions, calm yet divided. They knew that destroying their former comrades would be simple. But the story of the Jedi had always claimed to value redemption. What followed was a compromise that felt merciful. At the time, the ringleaders would be banished beyond known space, their names stricken. From public record, their crimes sealed in restricted archives. The Republic believed this would remove a threat without creating martyrs. The Jedi believed it would give the Force a distant lifetime to work upon wounded minds. The sentencing was carried out as a ritual of unmaking. Each Dark Jedi was brought forward in turn, their lightsabers presented before the assembly, and then surrendered to the care of the Council. Hilts that had once flashed through war were powered down and catalogued as relics of failure armor, and battle robes, bearing sigils of personal power, were stripped away, leaving plain garments that offered no rank, no command, no promise of empire to ensure compliance. The Jedi employed force-binding restraints, elegant cuffs and collars inscribed with containment seals. These devices did not sever a being from the Force, but they dampened the storm within, blunting the edge of rage and preventing the focused release of dark-side power. The message was clear. The war was over. The weapons of that war would not travel with them into the dark. From military dry docks, unarmed starships were prepared, stripped of heavy weapons, and escorted only as far as the edge of mapped hyperspace. Each vessel received a pre-programmed course pointed toward the uncharted galactic fringe. Star charts ended where their journeys began. Beyond that, there were only statistical projections of distant stars and empty void. The expectation was simple. The exiles would drift into obscurity, their lines would end on forgotten rocks, and over time even their memory would fade. Yet this act of mercy would reshape galactic history for thousands of years, sealed in their transports, surrounded by the silence between stars. The exiles carried more than bitterness. They carried techniques of forbidden alchemy, battle meditation, twisted by hatred, and a philosophy that glorified domination in the stillness. Those ideas did not die. They sharpen out there in the dark between systems. Ambition nursed old wounds and waited for a new home for the next 1,000 years. That waiting hatred would shape what came next, and what they found there would change everything. Drifting into legend, lost ships, and a hidden world out there in the dark between systems. Ambition nursed old wounds and waited for a new home for the next 1,000 years. That waiting hatred would shape what came next, and what they found there would change everything. As the exile began, the stars themselves seemed to stretch into lines. The defeated Dark Jedi stepped aboard their vessels and slipped into hyperspace, leaving behind the familiar trade routes and patrol lanes of the Republic. The bright corridors of Jedi temples fell away, replaced by the cold glow of navigation charts that grew emptier with every jump. Soon the ships were moving through regions unmarked on any map, drifting through a galactic night that no scout had ever catalogued. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power has been stripped away, and only resentment remains? The answer was written in the cramped corridors of those transports. The story of the exiles in transit was not one of triumph. It was one of quiet desperation, stripped of rank and title. These former Jedi sat in meditation chambers and cargo holds, replaying the war in their minds, convinced that the light side had betrayed true strength. They were defeated, but not humbled. Their belief in the dark side remained unbroken over time. The journey itself began to fray the edges of reason. Navigation beacons grew faint, then vanished. Astromech records, conflicted star charts disagreed. One damaged sensor array here, one miscalculated micro jump there. What followed was a slow drifting off the known grid. Some officers blamed faulty hyperdrives. Others whispered that the Force was guiding them, that the dark side refused to let its chosen servants simply vanish into empty space. Weeks bled into months. The hulls creaked under strain. Food supplies ran thin tempers, flared, duels broke out in training. Rooms as old arguments reignited. Through narrow viewports, a different pattern of stars emerged, unfamiliar constellations framed by a distant red glimmer that grew brighter with each course. Correction, the exiles argued over whether to turn back, but there was nowhere to return to. Only the steady, gravitational pull of that crimson point ahead. At last, the ships dropped from hyperspace above a harsh red world, its surface a swirl of rust, colored deserts, and jagged mountain ranges. The names surfaced from fragmented records and half-remembered myths. Caribbean, a word that seemed to resonate in the bones even before the sensors finished their scans. The planet radiated a heavy, oppressive presence in the Force, a brooding silence that pressed against the mind. This was no ordinary frontier world. As the exiles descended through dust-choked skies, they felt it more clearly. The dark side pooled in the ravines and canyons below, ancient and patient, as if it had been waiting for them for thousands of years. Korriban was steeped in an old, malign power, older than the Republic, older than the Jedi, older even than their recent war. And it was not empty. Shadowed structures jutted from the sands. Half-buried tomb entrances lined a vast valley, and unseen eyes seemed to watch from the ridges. The exiles had not discovered a dead world. They had arrived at a hidden cradle of the dark, and the beings that stirred beneath its surface were already listening. The original Sith, red-skinned lords of Korriban, in the stillness beneath those watching ridges, another truth waited to be uncovered. The word Sith had not begun as a creed or an order. It had begun as a people, before it became a banner of the dark side. The name belonged to a red-skinned species that had called Korriban and nearby Zeost home for thousands of years. Their presence was etched into the stone. Long before the first Jedi exile set foot on the sand far from the Republic, And its trade lanes, the Sith species had evolved in isolation. On a harsh desert world, their bodies reflected that severity. Tall and imposing, with deep crimson skin and heavy brow ridges, many bore fleshy tendrils around the mouth and jaw. Their appearance was striking, but what followed was more than simple biology. They adorned themselves with bone piercings, metal collars, and ritual scars, each mark a visible record of status, allegiance, and conquest. Their civilization was rigid and stratified. At the top stood kings and priest lords, beneath them warriors and scholars, and far below laboring castes that toiled in mines and quarries. Sith law was not written to be fair. It was written to preserve power. Bloodlines, determined authority, and ancestry was treated as a living currency in their courts. The story of a family's victories and cruelties mattered more than any abstract principle of justice. From the earliest records, the Sith had walked in step with the dark side, not as a forbidden path, but as the natural pulse of their world. They believed the Force responded most strongly to passion, pain, and dominance. Rituals of ascension involved trials by suffering visions induced through bloodletting and communal chants in tomb-lined caverns. The cries of the supplicants were considered offerings to the unseen currents of power that flowed beneath Korriban's crust over time. This produced a culture that saw conflict as sacred. Every challenge was a test sanctioned by the dark side, a king who could not crush. Rivals did not deserve the throne. A priest who could not bend spirits to obedience had no right to speak for the ancestors. What might appear to the Republic as cruelty was in Sith eyes proof that the galaxy itself favored the strong and the ruthless. Their cities and necropolises made that philosophy visible. Korriban's Great Valley was not a cemetery in the quiet sense. It was a monument to dominance. Colossal tombs thrust from the desert, each one taller, broader, and more severe than the last. The dead were not simply buried, they were enthroned in stone, wrapped in enchantments, and guarded by statues that glared down at the living. To walk that valley was to move through a corridor of judgment. This isolation allowed a harsh, mystical civilization to flourish. Unchallenged, no Jedi came to argue for the light side. No Republic Senate debated their wars. There was only the red sand, the chanting of priests, and the endless construction of new monuments to fear. Yet even in that remoteness, the Sith species was not prepared for what arrived from the stars, exiled Jedi sorcerers desperate for a new beginning. What they found there would change everything, and the meeting of proud castes and fallen knights would shape the next great dark empire. Gods from the sky. First contact between dark Jedi and Sith. The exiles came to Korriban not as conquerors descending on a thriving world, but as weary survivors falling toward a graveyard planet. The first approach was slow, their damaged ships cutting through the red-tinged clouds while below the Sith priests and kings gathered on the dunes. Metal vessels falling from the heavens were omens in their oldest carving signs that the gods of war had awakened again. What followed was a moment of collective silence, as sky and sand seemed to hold their breath around those landing sites. The native Sith formed vast circles of crimson-skinned warriors and bone-masked acolytes. The air trembled with drumbeats and low chanting as the ship's ramps lowered in their own legends. Beings of power would one day step from the sky to claim their bloodlines and lead them to greater darkness. And now pale strangers in worn Jedi robes emerged, carrying blades of light and eyes hardened by recent war. The story of this first contact was written in posture and gaze, long before a single word was translated. The exiled Jedi studied the gathering crowds and understood something crucial almost immediately. These were not a people who feared power. They worshipped it, the Sith already revered noble. Bloodlines, warrior castes, and an unseen spiritual realm that their sorcerer priests touched through rituals and sacrifice. They had no name for the Force, but they knew its pull in their storms, in their tombs, in the whispers that clung to their dead kings. This recognition would shape every choice the exiles made on that first day. Instead of pleading for refuge, The fallen Jedi chose to become the answer to the Sith people's oldest prophecies. They stepped forward as godlike lords and demonstrated the Force. With calculated precision, stones rose from the sand and hung frozen in the air. Bolts of crimson lightning arced from empty hands. Warriors found their weapons torn from their grasp, without a touch to an already superstitious culture. These displays did not appear as tricks. They were confirmations, ancient expectations suddenly made real. Over time, the relationship settled into something mutually profitable. The Sith species gained access to starships, forged alloys, and disciplined martial training that transformed tribal warriors into the core of a future empire. Their crude blood magics were refined into structured dark side disciplines, alchemy, illusions, and mental domination techniques. The exiles, in turn, acquired an instant hierarchy of priests, nobles, and soldiers ready to serve them. They did not need to build a cult. They stepped into one and claimed its throne. This fusion was deeper than armies and titles. The fallen Jedi took Sith consorts, and heirs were born, whose veins carried both refined Force sensitivity and the old world's ferocity. Temples rose that blended Jedi architecture with jagged Korriban stone philosophies merged until the line between native sorcery and imported darkside doctrine vanished for the next 1,000 years. This new hybrid order would grow in isolation, and the first true Dark Lords of the Sith were only beginning to emerge from the shadows of Korriban's tombs. Blood and titles. The birth of the Sith Lords, as that hybrid order took shape on Korriban, the transformation did not remain confined to temples and doctrine. It reached into bloodlines and names themselves. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is woven into heredity? The answer was a new ruling class that would shape Sith history for thousands of years over time. The exiled Jedi did more than command the native Sith. They married into their nobility. Human features, blended with crimson skin and bone spurs. Golden eyes met burning yellow irises in dynastic unions that were as political as they were biological. What followed was the rise of a caste that stood above both conqueror and conquered, a fusion of human ambition and ancient Sith ferocity that cemented the exiles at the very top of the empire in this emerging aristocracy. Titles carried almost as much weight as the Force itself. The word Sith had once meant only the red-skinned species who had called Korriban and Ziost home long before the Republic existed. Now that definition began to slip the height. Hybrid nobles, the priest kings and their dark side sages all claimed the name Sith for themselves. The original species became subjects, while their very identity was repurposed into a banner of domination. Over time, Sith shifted from a description of blood to a description of power. To be Sith was no longer merely to be born on Korriban. It was to command the dark side, to rule through fear and conflict, and to stand within a hierarchy that worshipped strength above all else. The native population remained present in vast numbers, but in inscriptions and proclamations, their role faded into the background of their own empire. At the pinnacle of this structure, a new title emerged, one that combined spiritual authority, political command, and martial supremacy. This was the Dark Lord of the Sith, a single supreme ruler recognized as the living embodiment of the Empire's will. This figure spoke with the voice of the dark side, presided over rituals of sorcery, commanded fleets and armies, and decided which rivals would be elevated or erased. Among the earliest of these was Ajunta Pal, once a Jedi general of the 100-Year Darkness, now remembered as the first true Dark Lord of the Sith. His story was the story of the Order itself, a journey from guardian of the light side to master of forbidden alchemy. His tomb in the Valley of the Dark Lords would one day whisper of a time when Jedi became something else entirely and never turned back. From this point onward, Sith Lords meant dark side practitioners first and foremost. The ancient species became a shadow behind the armored figures who bore their name. Yet, in that shadow, another presence stirred. For the next 1,000 years, new Dark Lords would rise upon Korriban's sands until one death in particular sent the entire empire spiraling toward its first great war. Korriban and Ziost, twin hearts of a growing empire, that death left a vacuum at the very center of Sith power, and in that vacuum, the Empire's twin hearts began to beat. In unison and in rivalry power, in the Sith Empire did not rest on a single world alone. It flowed between two very different planets, Korriban and Ziost. One was ancient hot and drenched in memory, the other cold-ordered and watchful. Together they formed the spine of a growing, dark civilization that for thousands of years remained unseen by the Republic. Korriban was the ceremonial heart of the Sith Empire, a red desert world where stone canyons opened into the Valley of the Dark Lords. There, colossal tombs sank deep into the rock, each one a monument to a single will, to power. The story of the Sith on Korriban was written in burial rites and carved into obsidian walls. Initiates walked in silence past the sarcophagi of Ajunta Pol and the early Dark Lords, feeling the weight of their presence in the Force on the surface. Korriban seemed almost empty, yet beneath the dust lay sprawling temple complexes where priests chanted in forgotten Sith tongues and acolytes endured brutal trials. Torches burned low in underground halls, illuminating murals of endless war against the light side. What followed was a culture that treated death not as an ending, but as a currency. Dark Lords sought immortality through alchemy and spirit binding their spirits, lingering in the corridors to whisper temptation to the living Ziost. By contrast was the Empire's brain, a colder forested world shrouded in grey skies. Its capital city, a maze of black stone fortresses and administrative towers here, the Dark Council chambers and military command centers dominated the skyline fleets, where commissioned armies were marshaled and long campaigns were plotted against rival powers in the unknown regions. Ziost lacked Korriban's overt mysticism, but its order and discipline would shape the Empire's long-term survival. At the apex of this system stood a single, Dark Lord of the Sith, sometimes styled as Emperor. Beneath this ruler, a circle of powerful Sith Lords governed sectors, commanded legions and oversaw entire castes below them. Lesser nobles, warriors and inquisitors competed in constant intrigue, while priestly orders guarded ritual knowledge and interpreted omens at the very bottom. Slaves and conquered aliens labored in mines, shipyards and temples, feeding the endless hunger of the dark side. All of this unfolded far beyond known hyperlanes in the tangled depths of the unknown regions. The Republic's star charts simply ended long before reaching Korriban or Ziost. This isolation was a shield without the Jedi to oppose them. The Sith refined their doctrines, tested new weapons, and turned conquest inward against each other, rather than outward against the galactic core over time. Their hidden empire hardened into something formidable. Yet isolation could not last forever. Ambitious minds on Ziost studied the stars and ancient hyperdrive relics. Others on Korriban listened to restless spirits that urged expansion. Eventually, a single encounter with the wider galaxy would pierce this veil of secrecy, and the Republic would learn that in the dark beyond its borders, an empire had been waiting. The creed of conflict, Sith, philosophy in its purest form, in the heart of that hidden empire, another force was taking shape. Not a fleet or a temple, but an idea power is born from struggle. But what happens when an entire civilization is built on that belief? The answer is the Sith creed of conflict. From the earliest Dark Lords on Korriban, the story of the Sith was inseparable from a single conviction. Conflict was not a tragedy to be avoided. It was a crucible in their eyes. War rivalry and constant testing stripped away illusion and exposed the strong for thousands of years. This belief would shape every institution and tradition of their empire. Those who triumphed in struggle proved they deserved to command those who failed, proved they were fit only to serve in Sith philosophy. Mercy was not a virtue. It was a betrayal of the natural order where the Jedi saw compassion and self. Denial as paths to harmony. The Sith saw them as chains that bound the strong to the weak, to spare a rival or to restrain ambition. So another might feel safe was to defy the dark side itself. A Sith Lord who hesitated at the moment of advantage, who granted an enemy mercy, would be condemned as weak. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. only when it was rare enough to be shocking over time. This creed justified the darkest structures of their society. Slavery was not merely tolerated, it was presented as proof that strength had done what strength must do. Conquered species on Korriban Zeost and beyond were bound in labor and ritual sacrifice, their suffering framed as the inevitable consequence of inferiority. Internal politics followed the same pattern. Apprentices were expected to challenge masters. Rivals were encouraged to sabotage one another. What followed was not stability, but a constant low burn of intrigue and assassination, all defended as the strong asserting their rightful dominance. Where the Jedi sought balance in the Force, the Sith pursued passion. They believed the dark side answered most readily to anger, ambition, and desire. These were not sins to be purged, but flames to be fanned. A Sith acolyte was taught to remember every slight, every humiliation, every unfulfilled craving, then to pour that storm of feeling into combat and sorcery. Tulak Horde's legendary duels and Naga Sado's terrifying illusions were held up as proof that unrestrained emotion unlocked power. The light side demanded serenity. The dark side demanded surrender. This fundamental divide created two incompatible visions of galactic order. The Jedi dreamed of harmony law and measured compromise. The Sith dreamed of an empire where every throne, every title, every breath was earned through struggle. Even as later, Sith orders changed their symbols, their numbers, and their strategies, this creed endured from Ajunta Pal to Revan, from the shadowy empires of the Old Republic to the rule of two in the Age of Bane. The belief remained the same. Only through conflict could the worthy rise and the galaxy be remade. In time, that belief would be tested not only against the Republic and the Jedi, but against the Sith themselves. Rule by the blade, hierarchy, betrayal, and survival. In time, that belief would be tested not only against the Republic and the Jedi, but against the Sith themselves. Because for the Sith, conflict did not end at the borders of their empire. It began in the throne room. At the very top of their hierarchy stood the Dark Lord of the Sith, in theory, an absolute master whose command carried the weight of the dark side itself. In practice, every Dark Lord ruled beneath a ceiling of blades from the moment a Sith ascended to that title. Their every decision was measured by ambitious rivals, their strength in the Force, their composure in war. Even a moment of hesitation could be read as weakness. What followed was a constant silent audit of authority. The council chambers on Zeost, the shadowed halls of Droman Khas, and later, the war rooms of Revan's fleet, all hid the same quiet question: who deserves this power more within this culture? Succession was not a sacred ceremony, but an opportunity. Assassination was not only expected, it was respected. If it succeeded, a poison cup, a sabotage shuttle, a blade ignited in the dark, all could be valid claims to the throne. Ritual combat offered a more formal path. Tulak Horde carving down challengers before assembled Sith Lords or Naga Sado, dueling rivals amid the tombs of Korriban. The rule was simple: triumph proved destiny, failure proved unworthiness. Political maneuvering filled the spaces between open bloodshed over time. Sith learned that information could be deadlier than any lightsaber. Some destroyed enemies by turning apprentices against masters, others by leaking plans to the Jedi and letting galactic war finish their rivals. So long as the challenger emerged stronger, the method was irrelevant. This was the story of eager power as the Sith understood it. The consequences of miscalculation were absolute. Those who failed to seize power were rarely granted a second chance. Many died swiftly executed, as an example. Others were broken more slowly, enslaved, bound by sorcery, or imprisoned in tombs to serve as eternal guardians in the eyes of the Sith. This was not cruelty. It was proof of a harsh philosophy. Those who could not take power did not deserve to hold it. Living beneath this constant pressure would shape every layer of Sith culture. Training academies, from Korriban to Malak drilled paranoia into their acolytes. Apprentices were encouraged to study their masters' weaknesses. Even as they learned from them, trust became a weapon to be exploited, never a refuge for thousands of years. This produced individuals of terrifying focus, cunning strategists, duelists without hesitation, and sorcerers willing to risk annihilation for a fragment of forbidden knowledge. Yet within that strength lay a fracture line each. Assassination removed not only a rival, but experience. Each purge scattered knowledge into hidden holocrons and haunted tombs empires that might have endured for the next 1,000 years. Instead, tore themselves apart from within, and as the Sith honed themselves into perfect predators, a quieter danger began to grow. One that would not strike from the shadows of Korriban, but from within the Force traditions that bound them together. Some Sith would see this instability and attempt to reshape the entire order. One Dark Lord in particular would look upon this endless cycle of betrayal and decide that the Sith must be broken before they could truly rule the galaxy. An empire in the dark. Expansion without opposition. The Dark Lord's answer to instability was simple and absolute. If the Sith were born from conflict, then the entire galaxy would have to be reforged through it. But before such a vision could threaten the Republic, the Sith Empire itself had to grow in the shadows for the next 1,000 years. This hidden empire expanded in the dark beyond the well-mapped hyperlanes of the core and the colonies. Its worlds lay in regions the Republic charted only as vague borders on star maps, distant clusters marked by numbers instead of names. What followed was a slow, relentless widening of Sith control system by system, moon by moon, until whole sectors answered to the will of a single throne. The method was always the same, but never gentle fleets of black hole warships emerged from hyperspace above isolated worlds. Their commanders spoke with the authority of the dark side, offering a brutal choice: submission or annihilation. Planetary militias fell quickly under orbital bombardment, but the Sith did not rely on force of arms alone. They sought out local rulers, governors, warlords, and merchant princes, promising power in exchange for loyalty. Those who accepted became client kings. Those who refused became examples over time. This strategy created a chain of worlds bound to the Empire through fear and ambition rather than shared culture on one planet. A hereditary council of nobles ruled at the pleasure of a Sith overseer. On another, a former resistance leader governed as a puppet dictator. His rise carefully engineered by Sith agents. In both cases, the message was clear. Power flowed downward from the Dark Lord and could be withdrawn at any moment behind these conquests. The infrastructure of a true war machine took shape: vast armies of soldiers and battle droids drilled beneath crimson skies, orbital shipyards, forged cruisers and carriers in endless rows. The Sith raised entire generations of officers and tacticians trained to think in terms of total domination. Networks of spies moved quietly between systems, reporting potential threats and opportunities, while secret cadres of sorcerers communed through the Force, weaving battle meditation illusions and curses into the Empire's campaigns. There were no Jedi here, no temple outposts, no wandering knights to answer. Desperate calls for aid on Sith-controlled worlds. The landscape itself testified to this new order. Towering citadels of black stone rose over ancient cities, their jagged silhouettes cutting against the stars below them. Slave markets churned day and night. Prisoners from conquered systems were bought, sold, and shipped to mines. Foundries and laboratories, academies loomed beside these plazas, not schools of compassion but training grounds, where children were taught that mercy was weakness, that pain was a tool, and that the dark side was the only honest path to strength. For thousands of years, this expanding frontier remained a rumor to the wider galaxy, a distant turbulence beyond the Republic's horizon. Yet such isolation could not last forever in a galaxy bound together by hyperspace. Even the most careful empire is only one miscalculated jump away from discovery. One lost ship, one desperate escape, one accident that would shape galactic history by revealing the Sith at last to the Republic. Ajunta Pol and the First Dark Lords, faces of the early Sith in the heart of that hidden Empire power, had a face and a name. The story of the early Sith is not only one of armies and empires, but of individuals whose choices would shape galactic history. Among the first and most enduring was Ajunta Pol, remembered for thousands of years in the echoing tombs of Korriban. as a legendary Dark Lord around the end of the 100-Year Darkness. Ajunta Pal stood among the defeated Dark Jedi exiles, a former Jedi Master who had turned away from restraint, and the light side he had pushed the Force beyond the boundaries accepted by the Order, experimenting with forbidden techniques that blurred the line between life and death. When the Republic cast the Dark Jedi into the unknown regions, Ajunta Pal carried with him a conviction that the Jedi were afraid not of evil, but of potential. What followed was the birth of something new on Korriban and Ziost. Surrounded by the red-skinned Sith species, Ajunta Pal found a people already steeped in dark rituals. What they found there would change everything. The ancient Sith had their own blood magic and funerary cults, but under Ajunta Pal and the other exiles, those practices were refined, hardened, and weaponized. Ajunta Pal became a master of Sith alchemy and bladecraft, fusing metallurgy with the dark side to forge weapons that were more than metal. His swords whispered to their wielders, drank in fear and anger, and in some tales even carried a fragment of his will. Over time, these blades and artifacts outlived their maker, long after Ajunta Pal's body turned to dust. His creations lay buried in Korriban's tombs, waiting for future Sith, and even Jedi to uncover them. Each discovery reignited old corruption, a reminder that in Sith, history, knowledge, and power rarely stayed dead. Ajunta Pal's life traced a pattern that would repeat again and again. A gifted Jedi chafes under rules, embraces the dark side, is exiled or cast out, and then he finds in the Sith Empire a place where ambition is not only permitted, but celebrated. He was not alone in defining that tradition. Tulak Horde rose generations later, famed for devastating military campaigns and unparalleled skill with the blade, where Ajunta Pal forged weapons. Horde forged conquests. Planets fell in rapid succession, their populations broken and folded into the Empire's growing war machine. Then there was Ludo Kresh, a conservative Dark Lord who embodied Sith political manipulation, guarding old ways and scheming against rivals, such as the more reckless Naga Sado. Together, figures like Ajunta Pal Horde and Kresh show that the Sith were never faceless monsters. Each Dark Lord had obsessions, alchemy, conquest, statecraft. Each left scars and teachings that layered upon those before them. For the next 1,000 years, every new Sith heir would walk through halls lined with their statues and tombs, breathing in a legacy of power and conflict. And in the shadows beyond those stone corridors, another ambitious Sith Lord was already preparing to drag this hidden empire into open war with the Republic. Marka Ragnos, the long reign of a Dark King. In that gathering darkness, the next name to dominate Sith history was Marka Ragnos. The story of his reign is not one of frantic conquest, but of controlled terror and calculated restraint. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is so absolute that even other Sith hesitate to reach for it? The answer in this age was Ragnos, around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin Marka. Ragnos rose above rival warlords on Korriban and Ziost through brutal duels and ruthless sorcery. Yet once he secured the title of Dark Lord, his empire did not erupt into constant civil war. Instead, what followed was an extended period of internal stability, a golden age by Sith standards. Worlds already under Sith control were fortified rather than abandoned to endless raids. Temples were completed rather than left as half-finished. Monuments to dead contenders. Ragnos achieved this stability through sheer personal power and an almost mythic reputation. Legends spread of his mastery of the dark side tales, claimed he could crush armored warriors with a gesture or bind rebellious spirits in eternal torment, whether exaggerated or not. These stories served a purpose. Ambitious, Sith Lords understood that open challenge meant annihilation. The cost of failure was too high, even for the most arrogant over time. This fear allowed the Empire to consolidate its holdings instead of bleeding itself dry in succession conflicts. Ragnos presided over the Council of Lords as an arbiter of ambition. He encouraged competition, but on his terms. When a Sith champion proved strength through conquest or sorcery, he rewarded them with new territory slaves or access to forbidden holocrons. When a rival's schemes threatened to fracture the Empire, he acted with sudden finality. Entire bloodlines were erased, fortresses reduced to ruins as a warning this balance between reward and destruction would shape Sith politics. For thousands of years, Ragnos demonstrated that a Dark Lord could channel the chaos of Sith culture without extinguishing it completely. The Empire remained cruel expansionist and steeped in the dark side, yet it did not tear itself apart. His rule became the reference point later Sith would invoke whenever they argued for a single unchallenged master. After decades of dominance, Marka Ragnos finally died, and his followers raised a monumental tomb for him in the Valley of the Dark Lords, on Korriban, carved into the Ochre Cliffs. His sepulchre towered above many who had come before a fusion of sharp, pyramidal lines and deep shadowed chambers within sarcophagi, statues and murals depicted him enthroned over kneeling Sith Lords as if judging them for eternity. Future generations would travel to that valley seeking guidance or legitimacy. Some meditated in the gloom of his halls, others tried to commune with his lingering spirit, hoping his approval would sanctify their claim to power. But the death of such a figure could not pass without consequence. The throne he left behind was too great a prize and too terrible a responsibility for lesser lords to ignore. In the silence after his funeral rites, old grudges resurfaced, new alliances formed in whispers, and along the shadowed paths between those tombs, two names began to rise: Naga Sado and Ludo Kresh, and their rivalry would drag the hidden Sith Empire into open galactic war at last. Walking the valley, a slow tour of the Dark Lord's tombs in the uneasy quiet. After Ragnos's funeral rites, the Valley of the Dark Lords waited. The sands of Korriban did not care who ruled the Sith Empire, only that the wind continued its endless work across stone and bone. Imagine that wind under a cold moon, carrying fine red dust along a canyon of statues, each one a frozen proclamation of power and ambition. Here, the story of the Sith is written not on Sate's parchment, but in rock. The path descends between colossal, robed figures, their faces eroded, their eyes still deep and accusing. On the left, the oldest facade looms heavy and plain. This is the tomb of Ajunta Pal, first among the dark Jedi exiles cast into the unknown regions. What they found there would change everything. A primitive Sith species already steeped in the dark side. Paul conquered them, then ruled them, and in death, his resting place reflects that early brutality. Thick, angular pillars, half-buried doors, and a sense that the stone itself resists intrusion. A little farther, the architecture grows more confident, the angles sharper, the statues more detailed. The Empire has found its identity. The tombs of early conquerors and warlords cluster together, their entrances flanked by warriors carved in mid-strike Tulak Horde's monument towers. Above the rest, a stepped pyramid biting into the sky. Its narrow causeway a reminder that his path to mastery was lined with the corpses of rivals for thousands of years. Tales of his campaigns would shape Sith training halls and dueling circles deeper into the valley. The designs begin to twist. The stone seems to sag and curl into symbols here. Rest the sorcerers and scholars of the dark side lords, who prized knowledge as much as conquest. One facade is a maze of runes and reliefs depicting rituals rather than battles. This is the domain of those who experimented with spirits, alchemy, and forbidden force techniques. Their tombs are less about intimidation and more about containment, as if the valley itself is trying to hold their secrets in place. Near the heart of the necropolis rises the most imposing structure of all Marka Ragnos's tomb, its entrance framed by a double row of statues, each one a Dark Lord who knelt to his authority. The central door is vast, yet deceptively simple, a single sigil of rulership carved above it. Ragnos ruled during a golden age of isolation. Under him, the Empire hardened into tradition, and for the next 1,000 years, every aspiring lord measured greatness against his shadow. Over time, the tombs grow slightly less weathered, their edges crisper, the names more familiar. These are the monuments raised in the closing years of that hidden empire. Among them, newer chambers await the legacies of Naga Sado and Ludo Kresh, their facades still being carved in stone. And in memory, the valley seems to hold its breath, because beyond these doors lies a different kind of darkness, one that will soon reach out through stolen hyperspace coordinates and drag the Sith into open galactic war. The Great Hyperspace War is about to etch fresh scars into both this canyon and history itself. Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh, rivals at the edge of war, in the silence that follows those carved faces. Another truth waits in the dark power, never leaves a vacuum for long. When a Sith tyrant dies, ambition rushes in to fill the void. The death of Marka Ragnos was not just the end of a reign, it was the spark of a new conflict around this moment in galactic history. The ancient Sith Empire stood at a crossroads for thousands of years. It had expanded, then stabilized behind its hidden borders, its Dark Lord ruling from Korriban and Zeost through fear and ritual. When Ragnos finally passed into the Force, there was no clear successor, only rivals and factions, each convinced the dark side favored them. From this turmoil, two figures emerged as the primary claimants to the mantle of Dark Lord Naga Sadow and Ludo Kresh. Their names would shape what followed was not merely a political dispute, but the story of two visions for the future of the Sith. Kresh represented the old guard Sadow, the dangerous promise of something new. Ludo Kresh was a conservative warlord. In every sense, he believed the Sith Empire should remain secure behind its borders, consolidating power, ruling through tradition and caution. To Kresh, the Republic and the Jedi were distant rumors, shadows beyond the Hyperlanes best left undisturbed. You saw the dark side as a flame to be guarded, not hurled into the wider galaxy. Naga Sadow stood in sharp contrast, ambitious, brilliant, and deeply versed in Sith sorcery. He was fascinated by the unexplored stars and the unsuspecting Republic beyond them. Where Kresh saw danger, Sadow saw opportunity. He dreamed of fleets pouring from hyperspace, of the Sith casting off isolation and forging a new galactic order. Under his command and his vision, the Empire would not hide. It would conquer their rivalry, hardened into an ideological clash. Should the Sith remain hidden and unassailable, or risk everything on a bold strike against the Republic? This question hung over every council, every whispered alliance in the shadowed halls of Korriban. Over time, supporters gathered around each claimant, the cautious lords backing Kresh, the ambitious and the restless turning to Sadow. The tension finally erupted at Ragnos' own funeral on Korriban, as their fleets hovered in orbit, and their followers clashed on the red sands. Sadow and Kresh confronted one another before the massive sarcophagus of the dead Dark Lord there. In a moment that would shape Sith legend, the spirit of Marka Ragnos appeared. His spectral form rose from the tomb, ancient armor glinting with cold light. The dark side itself seemed to still, as he rebuked both contenders, warning that their division threatened the strength of the Empire. Then he faded, leaving no clear endorsement. Yet each side interpreted the omen as validation. Kresh claimed Ragnos had condemned reckless conquest. Sadow insisted the warning proved the Sith must strike first or be doomed beneath Sadow's calm words. However, burned a hunger for glory that would not be denied. Soon he would begin to engineer the very contact with the Republic that Kresh feared most, using lost hyperspace routes and unfortunate explorers to pull the Jedi and the Sith into open war, and what they found there would change everything. An accidental discovery, hyperspace routes, and the opening of the war in the quiet lanes of galactic trade power often shifts not through grand designs but through small mistakes. A miscalculated course, a faulty star chart, a single jump into the dark. This is the story of two ordinary explorers whose era would shape an age of Sith and Jedi conflict. Around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin Gav and Jori Daragon were freelance hyperspace explorers, struggling to survive in the Republic. They leased an aging ship, the Starbreaker 12, and gambled their future on discovering new profitable routes. In an era when hyperspace travel was still dangerous, every jump was a risk. Miscalculations could strand travelers in empty space, or worse, when creditors closed in and their options vanished. The Daragon siblings made a desperate choice. They plotted an untested route using fragmentary charts stolen from Republic navigational records. That route led far beyond known space, toward the cold reaches where no official maps existed. What they found there would change everything. Instead of a quiet backwater system, The Darragons emerged in the heart of the hidden Sith Empire. Their arrival near Korriban shattered the illusion that the Sith and the Republic were separated by impenetrable distance. For thousands of years, the Sith had believed themselves safely concealed beyond the Republic's reach. Now a single Republic vessel hung in their skies, a silent omen. The shock ran both ways. Gav and Jory saw crimson deserts, monumental tombs, and war fleets bearing symbols no Republic historian recognized. They realized in an instant that this was no minor power, but an ancient empire steeped in the dark side on the other side. Sith observers understood something equally terrifying if one Republic ship had found them. Others could follow the age of secrecy was ending within the Sith ruling council. Naga Sadow moved fastest. He saw in the Darragons not intruders to be destroyed but tools to be used. He framed their presence as evidence that the Republic was preparing an invasion, arguing that the Jedi and the light side would one day come to extinguish Sith power. What followed was a ruthless political play. Sadow staged attacks on Sith worlds and even on the Darragons themselves, using Sith agents and elaborate illusions. He made it appear that Republic forces had already struck deep into Sith territory. He assaulted his own holdings, then blamed Ludocresh, twisting fear into a weapon. Sadow's mastery of deception turned uncertainty into outrage, and outrage into support for war. Over time, his narrative took hold. Rallies in the great plazas of Ziost thundered with calls for preemptive conquest. Sadow claimed only a massive strike against the Republic could ensure Sith survival and glory. He secured custody of Gav and Jory, presenting them as living proof of Republic aggression, while secretly planning to use their hyperspace knowledge as a bridge into Republic space. In the end, the Darragons' accidental jump became the spark that ignited the Great Hyperspace War. Their single miscalculated route opened a corridor through which Sith fleets and dark-side sorcery would soon pour toward the core worlds. And as Sadow's warships prepared to vanish into hyperspace, the Republic still slept unaware that an ancient empire was already on its way. The Great Hyperspace War, a galaxy, trembles around 5,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The galaxy drifted in relative peace. The Republic traded and legislated, the Jedi meditated and patrolled the hyperlanes, seemed predictable and safe. But power in the Star Wars galaxy rarely remains dormant for long beyond known space. An ancient Sith empire had already chosen its moment when Naga Sadow's fleets finally moved. What followed was sudden and terrifying. From hidden strongholds in the Sith territories, colossal warships plunged into hyperspace, following the stolen Darragon route. They did not emerge over distant borders. They arrived above key Republic worlds in the core. The inner rim Coruscant, Kirek and other systems woke to crimson silhouettes sliding out of hyperspace. Their hulls traced with Sith runes that glowed against the dark Sadow did not rely on metal and turbo lasers alone. He was a master of Sith sorcery and battle meditation deep within his flagship. He sank into a trance, reaching through the Force to touch every crew member, every pilot, every soldier. His will sharpened their reflexes, dulled their fear, and pushed their aggression to lethal extremes. At the same time, he projected vast illusions across the void, turning a single task force into what appeared to be an armada Republic. Observers saw the sky fill with more ships than their sensors could count. Phantom cruisers drifted between real destroyers. Squadrons of non-existent fighters swarmed their formations. The story of the Great Hyperspace War, in its opening days, is a story of perception as much as firepower. Sadow understood that fear could break a system faster than any bombardment, and he used the dark side to manufacture that fear on a galactic scale. His alchemical experiments added another layer to the nightmare. Sadow had twisted beasts through Sith alchemy, breeding monstrous war creatures that could survive the vacuum of space or tear. Through fortifications on the ground on some worlds, defenders watched in disbelief as living weapons clung to hulls and space stations ripping open metal with talons empowered by the dark side. These horrors were few in number, but his illusions made them seem endless. For the Republic, the response was desperate and chaotic. The Jedi Order found itself facing organized Sith forces for the first time in recorded history. Jedi starfighters scrambled to meet enemy squadrons. Jedi strike teams boarded Sith cruisers to confront Crimson armored warriors wielding unfamiliar techniques. The calm balance of the light side met the raw fury of the dark side in corridors, hangars, and city streets. Entire systems became battlegrounds in a matter of days. Yet the very ambition that launched the war also carried the seeds of its end. Sado's rivals among the Sith, especially Ludo Kresh, saw his campaign as reckless. Over time, their political conflict turned into open civil war. Even as Sith fleets fought the Republic, they also clashed with each other. Sado staged false attacks to frame Kresh. He used more illusions to manipulate allies and enemies alike. But each deception weakened the Empire's unity as Republic and Jedi forces adapted to his tricks. The illusions lost some of their terror. Sensors were recalibrated tactics, adjusted worlds that had panicked in the first wave began to harden their defenses. The Great Hyperspace War burned hot and fast, devastating but brief compared to later conflicts. Within a short span, Sado's overreach, Kresh's opposition, and determined Jedi counterattacks shattered the first Sith Empire. From within the Sith, who had remained hidden for thousands of years, now faced ruin and exile and the galaxy. It seemed once more to stand at the end of a dark chapter rather than its beginning. Fall of the First Empire, ruins, refugees, and exiles, again in the quiet that followed the Great Hyperspace War. The truth of Sith power became painfully clear. Power could conquer fleets and scorch worlds, but could it survive betrayal from within and relentless pressure from without? The answer, once again, was the Sith tearing themselves apart, even as the Jedi and the Republic closed in. As Sado's invasion collapsed, the internal conflict he had tried to control finally erupted. Ludo Kresh, who had long opposed Sado's reckless aggression, gathered loyalists and declared himself the rightful Dark Lord. What followed was not a united defense of the Empire, but a civil clash at the worst possible moment their fleets met above Korriban, amid the funerary orbits of ancient tomb ships. Sado's forces and Kresh's armadas tore into one another in a storm of turbo laser fire and boarding actions. In the end, their duel of ambitions ended in mutual destruction. Shattered flagships drifted among the Red World's moons as Republic task forces emerged from hyperspace to finish what Sith pride had begun on the surface. The cost was even more terrible. The Valley of the Dark Lords on Korriban, once a solemn canyon of colossal statues and sealed mausoleums, became a battlefield. Republic bombardments and Sith desperation cracked open ancient tombs. Stone faces that had gazed down for thousands of years were blasted apart. Sarcophagi split, and the mummified remains of forgotten kings were scattered in the dust. Nearby cities that had grown around temples and academies burned under orbital fire. The once mighty empire that had ruled from Korriban and Ziost was reduced to isolated fortresses and fleeing warbands. Ziost fared no better. Its black forests and frozen plains were scarred by retreating Sith who unleashed dark side rituals to deny the Republic intact strongholds. Entire citadels sank into the ice as foundations were shattered by controlled detonations. Archives were torched to keep secrets from Jedi investigators. Over time, these worlds of origin became graveyards rather than capitals haunted by spirits and the lingering echo of Sith alchemy. Naga Sado refused to die with his crumbling realm. Instead, he gathered a remnant of loyal followers and vanished into the depths of hyperspace. Cast off the known hyperlanes, they emerged above a green moon in a remote system, Yavin 4. What they found there would change everything for Sado and for the distant future. Dense jungles swallowed ancient stone outcroppings, and the Force felt thick and receptive to manipulation. Here in isolation, Sado ordered the construction of towering step pyramids, massive temples that rose above the canopy. Each became a focus for dark experiments as he refined Sith sorcery and alchemy far from Jedi interference. Yet Sado was not the only survivor. Scattered across the fringes of the galactic map, other Sith Lords and lesser adepts slipped away to hidden strongholds. Some disappeared into uncharted regions. Others embedded themselves on backwater worlds, preserving bloodlines and fragments of doctrine in crumbling holocrons. These shards of knowledge would shape later cults and resurgent orders. Long after the Republic recorded the Sith as extinct, a pattern was emerging. Sith empires rose swiftly to terrifying heights, then collapsed in violence. But their ideas, their artifacts and their exiles endured in the shadows, waiting for the next age of conflict, when the dark side would once again demand an empire of its own. Echoes of Sado, the long shadow of Sith alchemy, in the quiet that followed the collapse of Naga Sado's empire. The dark side did not fade. It condensed. It retreated into stone and shadow. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is sealed away in forgotten temples on a jungle moon? The answer is the long echo of Sado's alchemy around the end of the Great Hyperspace War. Naga Sado fled to Yavin for what followed was not a simple exile, but an experiment in survival. He raised massive pyramidal temples from the jungle earth, each one a vast laboratory of the dark side. Within their crimson halls, he twisted life and matter-warping Massassi servants into brutal guardians and altering the very ecosystem around his sanctuaries. The story of those temples is the story of a Sith Lord trying to rewrite the rules of existence inside these complexes. Sado pushed Sith alchemy beyond anything the earlier Dark Lords had attempted. He bred monstrous war beasts designed for siege and terror. He forged amulets and talismans that could bend perception and harden flesh against lightsabers. He did not stop at the physical realm. His greatest work probed the structure of the Force itself, testing how far illusion and mental domination could reach across a battlefield. Sado's mastery of illusion and battle meditation had already nearly broken the Republic during the Great Hyperspace War on Yavin 4. He refined those same techniques in isolation. He inscribed his findings into murals and etched formulae into black stone. He sealed holocrons with layered passwords of thought and emotion. Over time, those devices and carvings became silent teachers, waiting patiently for the next Sith, who could understand them for thousands of years. Dense jungle swallowed the temples, but the knowledge inside endured centuries later. Freedon Nad would seek out remnants of Sado's teachings, drawing on that legacy to found his own dark dynasty on Onderon. Even later, Exar Kun would come to Yavin 4. What they found there would change everything. Kun, in particular, plundered Sado's laboratories, learned his alchemical methods, and awakened sleeping spirits. The atrocities of the Great Sith War were fueled in part by lessons first written in those hidden chambers. This pattern revealed something essential about the Sith, even in defeat. They turned retreat into incubation. Isolation became a crucible where new arts were forged away from Jedi interference. Each failed empire left behind holocrons, temples, and cursed artifacts, and each new generation of dark side adepts treated them as scriptures and blueprints over time. The Republic recorded the Sith as extinct, yet their alchemy resurfaced again and again. Warped creatures on distant worlds, corrupted relics in private collections, and secret rituals practiced by cults all carried faint fingerprints of Sado's Wabuk. His shadow lingered in every attempt to weaponize life itself. For the next 1,000 years, these buried traditions simmered beneath galactic events, unseen but not inactive. The Sith were changing philosophy, splintered and recombined, and from the ashes of the old empires, new movements began to stir. Soon different visions of Sith power would rise, drawing on ancient knowledge, yet reshaping it for a new age of conflict, from ruins to crusade. The Great Sith War and Exar Kun. Over time, those buried currents of Sith thought did not disappear. They waited in forgotten holocrons in sealed tombs and in the faint whispers of spirits tied to ancient stone. But what happens when those echoes finally reach a mind powerful enough to answer the story of the Great Sith War? Begins with that question, and with a single gifted Jedi who listened around 4,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The galactic map looked very different. The Republic endured the Jedi Order, still watched over the light side, and the old Sith Empire that once ruled from Korriban and Ziost had fallen into distant legend. For thousands of years, its Dark Lords were remembered as myths and cautionary tales, their temples reduced to ruins, their empires to footnotes in Jedi archives. Into this age was born Exar Kun, a brilliant Jedi Knight whose command of the Force and the lightsaber drew admiration and concern. In equal measure, he excelled in study and combat, yet grew restless under the restraints of Jedi doctrine. Power fascinated him, Kun sought out worlds the Jedi rarely visited. He journeyed to Korriban, walking the Valley of the Dark Lords, where the sand swallowed sound and colossal statues watched in silence. There, he entered the tombs of the First Empire, searching for holocrons and scrolls left by the exiled Dark Jedi of the 100-Year Darkness. What he found there would change everything. Sith spirits tested him, probed his ambition, and fed his doubts about the Jedi and their fear of the dark from Korriban. His path led to Yavin 4, once the refuge of Naga Sado after the Great Hyperspace War. Its jungles hid massive stone temples infused with centuries of dark side rituals inside those pyramids. Exar Kun encountered the lingering will of that earlier age, the trapped spirits and alchemical legacies of Sado's line in that oppressive stillness. He surrendered the last of his hesitation and accepted a new mantle Dark Lord of the Sith. The title, thought extinguished, was reborn in a single whispered vow. Kun did not simply imitate the old empire. He reshaped the Sith tradition to fit his own vision, gathering disillusioned Jedi and fallen students into a new brotherhood. Of the Sith, he turned their skills against their former masters. Temples, burned archives were corrupted, and entire systems became battlegrounds. His Great Sith War was shorter than the Great Hyperspace War. Yet, in its brief span, it shattered worlds and trust alike. Mass defections from the Jedi Order left scars that would shape later conflicts in Exar Kun's rise. The pattern repeated, a Jedi drawn to power, convinced that only by embracing the dark side could the galaxy be remade. His fall ended in defeat and imprisonment, as a restless spirit bound to Yavin's temples. But the war he unleashed did not simply fade when the last battle ended. Remnants of his teachings scattered into the shadows, and the next generation of Sith aspirants was already watching, waiting for a different master with an even more dangerous vision. Revan and Malak, pragmatists of the dark side. The war Exar Kun began ended in ruins and haunted temples, but the galaxy did not have long to rest. Around 3,956 years before the Battle of Yavin, two new figures stepped out of the smoke of recent conflict. Revan and his friend Malak, once promising Jedi Knights, now forged in the crucible of the Mandalorian Wars. The story of their rise would shape not only the next great Sith resurgence, but the very way the dark side was used in galactic conflict. Those Mandalorian Wars were brutal campaigns fought on shattered worlds along the Outer Rim. Entire cities were glassed, populations displaced, fleets burned while the Jedi Council hesitated, fearing that open intervention would feed the dark side. Revan and Malak could not accept inaction. They defied orders, took command of Republic forces, and drove the Mandalorians back through sheer will and ruthless strategy. Over time, victory became their obsession, and each compromise made in the name of peace pushed them further from the light side. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power flows through a weapon built by an older darkness than the Sith themselves? The answer is found in their discovery. Beyond known space, chasing rumors and encrypted Mandalorian charts, Revan and Malak uncovered remnants of the ancient Rakatan Infinite Empire. What they found there would change everything. On a dead system's edge hung the Starforge, a colossal station, a dark side-fueled factory that could pull raw matter from nearby stars and endlessly manufacture warships, droids and weapons standing before this machine. Revan saw not a simple superweapon, but the foundation of a new order. What followed was the rapid birth of a fresh Sith Empire. Fleets appeared, seemingly from nowhere. Soldiers and assassins pledged to a masked Dark Lord who still wore the discipline of a Jedi general. Revan used the dark side with a cold, almost philosophical precision. He preferred control to chaos, turning enemies into servants, subjugated worlds into resource nodes, and former Jedi into strategic assets rather than trophies of conquest. Malak followed as apprentice and warlord, yet his interpretation of Sith power was cruder, more direct. Where Revan would spare a planetary infrastructure to maintain supply lines, Malak would order orbital bombardment to break resistance through terror. Entire populations were threatened with annihilation to force surrender. In one infamous campaign, civilian centers were targeted first, not last. The partnership between master and apprentice became a study in contrast, subtle manipulation facing raw aggression. Eventually, that tension could not be contained. Malak betrayed Revan in the middle of battle, seizing command of the Starforge, and turning the Empire toward even greater brutality under his rule. The dark side flowed unchecked, and the war lost its strategic restraint. This shift from calculated domination to open devastation would echo through Sith history, as a warning that even among the Sith, there was a dangerous line between disciplined darkness and mindless destruction, and another transformation of their order was already waiting just beyond Malak's fall: the Starforge, an industrialization of darkness under Malak. The war lost its restraint, but the true engine of that devastation did not sit on any throne. It hung in the void above an ancient Rakatan world, a silent silhouette against the burning face of a star. This was the Starforge, a weapon not in the shape of a blade or a super laser, but an idea given metal form endless production as an instrument of the dark side. In the long history of galactic conflict, factories had always limited empires: how many ships could be built, how many droids could be fielded, how quickly damaged fleets could be replaced. The Starforge made those old questions meaningless. It was an immense orbital facility, a hollowed-out ring and spire complex capable of producing warships, starfighters, droids, and weapons on a scale no conventional shipyard could match. Its assembly lines were not bound by normal supply chains. Its forges did not cool. The Rakata had created it at the height of their infinite empire, and what they found there would change everything about how later Sith understood industrial power. The forge drew raw energy from the nearby star, but that was only the beginning. It also fed on the Force itself, specifically the dark side over time. The hatred, fear, and ambition of those who commanded it seeped into its systems. The more it was used, the more efficient it became, and the more corrupting its presence grew. It was a factory and a wound in the Force. At the same time, when Revan and Malak uncovered this relic, the story of their Sith Empire shifted from difficult war to overwhelming onslaught before the Forge. Their fleets were formidable after it. Their armadas seemed to appear from nowhere. Cruisers rolled off its lines in continuous waves. Droid armies marched from its bays fully armed and programmed. Each new campaign drew upon fresh squadrons that had not existed weeks earlier. Republic admirals facing these forces saw casualty projections that no logistics model could explain for the Sith under Revan and later Malak. This technological abomination became a dark miracle. Reinforcements stopped being a concern. Lost destroyers were simply replaced morale among Sith crews, hardened into ruthless confidence. Why fear attrition when the Forge waited above a star ready to erase every setback for Republic worlds? The psychological impact was devastating. Planets that once trusted in the slow rebuilding of their defenders now watched replacement fleets burn almost as quickly as they arrived. Resistance began to feel futile, and that feeling was itself a weapon, yet such concentration of dark side energy carried a hidden cost. No nexus that intense could endure forever. The Starforge twisted those who relied on it, amplifying their aggression, eroding their judgment. What followed was an acceleration towards self-destruction, as the Forge pushed Malak's empire to ever greater extremes, and somewhere in the shadows, the first moves toward its destruction were already beginning a quiet countercurrent in the Force that would shape everything that came after. The Jedi Civil War, when the enemy war. Familiar faces, that quiet countercurrent in the Force did not begin with a new weapon or an ancient ritual. It began with doubt. The Jedi Civil War was not a clash between distant empires across the galactic rim. It was an internal fracture, a war in which the enemy wore familiar faces, and every fallen opponent had once stood in the same training halls. Around this time, the story of Revan shifted from conquering warlord to something more. Unsettling, Revan and Malak were not outsiders. They were former Jedi Knights who had already defied the Council once by joining the Mandalorian Wars. Their victories and the power they wielded made them legends, but it also convinced them that the old Jedi ways were too slow, too cautious, too afraid of decisive action. What followed was a campaign to reshape the galaxy. By force, Revan's charisma became a weapon as dangerous as any fleet in council chambers, and quiet corridors arguments spread that only strength could protect the Republic from future threats. The Jedi had hesitated against the Mandalorians, and countless worlds had burned Revan's new Sith, promised that would never happen again. Many Jedi listened and heard, not treason, but conviction. They believed they were saving the galaxy through harsh measures, through an empire of order built on the dark side over time. This movement stopped being a mere schism and hardened into open war. Jedi fought Jedi across familiar worlds. Padawans faced their former mentors on ruined temple steps in orbit above key systems. Revan's fleets clashed with Republic defenders who recognized the tactics of their own missing heroes. The conflict blurred every moral boundary the Order had relied on for thousands of years. Then came Malak's betrayal. In a moment of cold ambition, he turned his guns on Revan's flagship, attempting to kill his own master, and seized the mantle of Dark Lord. This act of treachery shattered what little unity remained in the Sith ranks, yet it also opened the door to something the dark side had not anticipated. Revan survived, stripped of memory, and taken in by the very Jedi he had once abandoned. This act of mercy would reshape galactic history. Guided back toward the light side, Revan ultimately returned to confront Malak on the Starforge. Their final duel ended with Malak's death and the destruction of the Forge. Revan's redemption or destruction, depending on the telling closed one chapter. But the damage was already done. The Jedi Order emerged, decimated, its numbers thinned, its faith shaken. The lesson was inescapable. The greatest threat might not come from distant Sith empires, but from within its own ranks. In the centuries that followed, the Jedi responded with caution and then with dogma rules. Tightened emotions were distrusted, attachments forbidden. What they found there would change everything, a new rigidity that promised safety, yet quietly sowed the seeds of future discontent and future Sith waiting for another moment of doubt in the Force. Between empires, the new Sith wars begin. Over the next 1,000 years, that tension between fear and freedom define the galaxy. Power corrupts, but what happens when that power is scattered, broken, and remembered only in fragments across the stars? The answer is a different kind of Sith age. Not one single empire, but a repeating pattern of shadows for the next 1,000 years after Revan's wars. What followed was a cycle the Republic and the Jedi believed the Great Crusades were over yet. In the dark corners of the Outer Rim and the unknown regions, remnants of defeated Sith movements survived. Warlords, cults, and hidden academies clung to scraps of doctrine, each convinced it carried the true legacy of the dark side, each preparing for another chance at galactic conflict. Over time, these reconstituted Sith drew on whatever they could find. The holocrons of Naga Sadow, whispered, half-remembered sorcery, alchemy, and illusion. Revan's scattered records suggested strategies of feigned retreat and sudden overwhelming assault. But most of these new masters did not fully understand their sources. They repeated rituals without context, copied campaigns without grasping the deeper philosophy. The story of the Sith became a chain of imitations, each more desperate than the last. Across centuries, this produced not one Sith empire, but many. Some were brutal theocracies, ruled from hidden temples. Others were loose coalitions of dark warlords, carving up sectors with mercenary fleets. One generation might raise a brotherhood of the Sith, another a triumvirate, or a council of equals. Each new order claimed to correct the failures of the previous, yet each carried the same flaw, internal conflict that eventually shattered it from within. Meanwhile, the Republic endured, but at great cost. The new Sith Wars, as this long era came to be known, were not a single war, but a grinding sequence of campaigns, uprisings, and crusades. Entire regions changed hands multiple times. Worlds became battlefields for decades. The Jedi Order, once a more contemplative guardian of the light side, became increasingly militarized. Jedi generals led armies. Jedi commanders held fortified positions. Peacekeeping blurred into occupation. Contemplation into strategy. Over time, robes were replaced by armor meditation halls, by war rooms. Young Jedi grew up knowing only conflict and emergency. The code-hardened councils became cautious, then rigid. Every new Sith resurgence seemed to justify another restriction, another layer of control, meant to prevent the dark from rising within their own ranks. Yet that same rigidity made adaptation difficult and dulled their ability to see new threats forming in the shadows. On the other side, the Sith experimented constantly. Some movements embraced mass recruitment, building vast armies of lesser adepts. Others tried strict hierarchies or attempted to erase titles altogether in favor of collective rule. None of it lasted. The dark side encouraged ambition and rivalry, and without a guiding structure, that ambition repeatedly tore these empires apart. Just when victory seemed within reach by the final centuries of the new Sith Wars, one figure watched this pattern with unusual clarity. A Sith who studied the long record of failure from Ajunta Pal to Naga Sado, from Exar to Revan, and the warlords that followed. He saw not just defeat, but a lesson. This would shape everything that came next, because from that realization would emerge Darth Bane and a decision to reinvent the Sith from the ground up, the Brotherhood of Darkness. Many Sith, little secrecy. Power always seeks order, but what happens when those who worship the dark side try to tame their own chaos? The answer in the late New Sith Wars was the Brotherhood of Darkness, around 1,000 years before the Battle of Yavin. The Galactic War between Sith and Jedi had dragged on for generations. Countless warlords had risen and fallen, each convinced their empire would shape history. Instead, their rivalries shattered every victory, from Revan to the later New Sith warlords. The Sith kept destroying one another faster than the Jedi could defeat them. What followed was an experiment almost unheard of in Sith tradition: unity. This experiment was the work of Lord Khan, a charismatic commander who believed the age of solitary Dark Lords had to end. Khan gathered surviving factions under a single banner and declared them equals, not vassals. He rejected the grandiose hierarchies of ancient empires. In theory, there would be no Darths, no ruling dynasty of one supreme master, only the Brotherhood of Darkness, a council of Sith Lords bound by shared purpose to break the Republic and the Jedi on paper. It sounded efficient if Sith ambition caused endless civil conflict. Why not mute it? Why not direct every blade and every ritual outward against the light side, instead of inward? Khan minimized titles, discouraged open duels for supremacy, and demanded loyalty to the collective victory rather than personal glory. Over time, ranks that had once inspired fear became flatter, more bureaucratic. Sith generals led legions of dark-side infantry into battle, but their personal hunger was expected to serve the group in practice. This act of mercy toward fellow Sith was a poison to their creed. The story of the Sith had always been written in struggle apprentices, overthrowing masters, warlords, carving empires through ruthless competition, that brutality forged monsters. Immense power in the Force. By smothering rivalry, Khan dulled the edge that made them terrifying. Many lords grew complacent content with shared authority and predictable campaigns. Fewer dared to reach beyond the Brotherhood's limits. The result was a grinding stalemate, with the Jedi enormous armies clashed on worlds across the Outer Rim, and the Galactic core alike, from Ruusan to other forgotten battlefields. The Force shook under the weight of mass darkside and lightside powers. Entire planets were scarred cities, turned to ash, then rebuilt only to fall again. For the next 1,000 years of accumulated conflict, the galaxy had rarely known peace. But now it knew exhaustion. Within this weary brotherhood, one warrior watched more closely than most. A miner's son turned Sith named Darth Bane. He studied the old chronicles of Ajunta Pal Naga, Sado Exar and Revan, and saw in their defeats a pattern Khan refused to face. To Bane, the Brotherhood of Darkness was not salvation, it was the final symptom of decay. And as the war on Ruusan intensified, he began to shape a different answer to the Sith problem, one that would demand a terrible price. Darth Bane, architect of a new Sith order. Power corrupts. But what happens when that power is shared among too many masters, all grasping at the same prize? The answer in the end was Darth Bane. On the battlefields of the new Sith Wars, he watched the Brotherhood of Darkness throw endless lives into the fire, and understood that this was not strength, it was exhaustion. Given form, born Dessel a miner on the harsh world of Apatros, he had grown up under cruelty and debt before the dark side ever touched him. The war against the Republic offered escape, and a place in the Sith armies. He became a brutal but disciplined warrior. Yet among the Brotherhood's ranks, he saw commanders more interested in politics than victory. Their councils were full of compromise and flattery. Khan preached equality among Sith, but to Bane this was a betrayal of the old creed that power must be earned and taken over time. That disillusionment drove him inward, When others schemed for rank, he sought knowledge. He turned to the archives of the Brotherhood, and then beyond them, to forbidden repositories of the old Sith Empire there. He found crumbling manuscripts and recorded visions from holocrons bearing the imprints of Ajunta Pal Naga, Sado Friedan, Nad Exar, Kun Revan, and others. The story of the Sith unfolded for him, not as scattered legends, but as a continuous chain of ambition and failure. What followed was a realization, as sharp as any blade. Across centuries, the pattern repeated itself. A powerful, Dark Lord rose, built an empire, gathered disciples, and then watched it fracture from within the great Hyperspace War. The great Sith War. The Jedi Civil War. Each ended not only because of Jedi resistance, but because the Sith tore at each other. Too many rivals, too much open war, too visible to the Jedi and the Republic. The very abundance of Siths, their weakness. Bane concluded that survival demanded something radical. He envisioned a new structure, not an army of Dark Lords, but a lineage in shadow, the rule of two. At any given time, there would be only one true Sith Master embodying the full legacy of dark side power, and a single apprentice whose purpose was to learn, grow stronger, and one day overthrow the Master. This enforced conflict between two would ensure that only the most cunning and powerful survived, while the Order itself remained hidden in this vision. Bane became both destroyer and preserver. To save the Sith, he was willing to annihilate the Brotherhood of Darkness, erase its armies and its temples, and reduce the Order to a single thread of continuity. It was a terrible mercy aimed at the future. For the next 1,000 years, the Sith would abandon open war and vanish from galactic sight. Yet, in that quiet absence, Bane believed their true revenge was only beginning. The thought bomb and the end of the new Sith Wars in the cold calculus of Darth Bane's vision, mercy, and annihilation became the same gesture power demanded a reset. But what happens when that reset is not a battle or a coup, but a weapon that erases every mind on the field? The answer is the thought bomb around the final campaigns of the new Sith Wars on Ruusan. The Brotherhood of Darkness faced a grinding stalemate against Lord Hoth's Army of Light. Both Sith and Jedi had thrown everything into the conflict. Entire generations knew nothing but war. The story of that ending would shape galactic history for thousands of years, and it began with an ancient ritual whispered in the darkest corners of Sith lore. The thought bomb was not a simple superweapon. It was a focused vortex in the Force, a dark side implosion designed to detonate at the level of consciousness when unleashed. It did not merely kill. Instead, it tore the souls of every Force-sensitive caught within its radius from their bodies and bound them together in a seething prison of thought, an eternal storm of fear, rage and pain trapped in the very soil where it was triggered. What followed was not victory or defeat in any conventional sense, but obliteration. Bane understood this better than any of his peers. He had studied the old holocrons. He knew the ritual was madness, yet he also saw its terrible utility. Over time, the Brotherhood had become exactly what he despised, an undisciplined mass of dark side adepts obsessed with equality rather than hierarchy. So he began to whisper to Lord Khan, the charismatic leader of the Brotherhood. He fed Khan's paranoia, suggested that the Jedi battle meditation on Ruusan could only be broken by something greater, a single transcendent surge of dark power. Khan already feared losing his grip on the Sith ranks. Bane promised a solution. He framed the thought bomb as the ultimate expression of unity. Every Sith mind joined in one overwhelming strike that would scour the Jedi from Ruusan and end the war in a single instant. Desperate and exhausted, Khan accepted Bane's counsel. He gathered his followers deep in the caves beneath the battlefield. While the Jedi advanced above, at the appointed moment, Khan led the Brotherhood. In the ritual, their combined will coalesced into a growing point of darkness in the Force. The Jedi sensed the disturbance, and Lord Hoth charged into the caverns with many of his greatest knights, hoping to contain the threat. They arrived only in time to be caught within its radius. When Khan triggered the detonation, the Force itself screamed, then fell silent in a heartbeat. The Brotherhood of Darkness ceased to exist. So did Hoth and a vast portion of the Army of Light. the battlefield above became eerily quiet. No armies, no commanders, only scorched earth and an invisible wound in the force beneath Ruusan lay a sphere of trapped consciousness, a prison of Sith and Jedi spirits locked together in endless torment. Bane was not among them. He had engineered the entire event, then removed himself from the blast. Radius, under the pretext of seeking reinforcements, when the echo of the thought bomb faded, he returned to a world without a Sith army. No rival warlords, no ambitious councils, just ruin. This was exactly the emptiness he desired. From that silence he could build in the aftermath. Bane stood as one of the only surviving Sith unbound by the Brotherhood's dogma, free to enact the rule of two. His new paradigm rejected legions and banners in favor of secrecy. A single master and a single apprentice, hidden beneath the notice of both Republic and Jedi. From this point, the Sith ceased to be an open, conquering empire and became a patient conspiracy, working in shadow. For the next 1,000 years, the Jedi believed the Sith destroyed, yet beneath that assumption, Bane's lineage endured. Ruusan marked a turning of the age. The thought bomb ended the new Sith Wars, but it also opened a corridor into a different kind of darkness. The great crusading orders and massed fleets faded from the center of the story. Of the Sith in their place came quiet infiltration, manipulation from the Senate to the underworld, and in time this unseen thread would lead directly to a seemingly unremarkable politician from Naboo whose rise would change everything again. The rule of two. Master, apprentice, and 1,000 years of patience power invites ambition. But what happens when that ambition is narrowed to just two beings at a time? The answer is the most patient design the Sith ever conceived. The rule of two, a philosophy that traded roaring legions for a whisper in the dark, in the quiet that followed the last great campaigns of the new Sith Wars. Darth Bane looked back across Sith history and saw a pattern of self-destruction empires risen through the dark side, only to collapse under the weight of their own conflict. The story of the Sith had been one of excess. Many lords, many armies, many rival agendas. Bane resolved that what followed was going to be different. His solution was brutally simple. One master, one apprentice. The master would embody the power of the dark side, the living crest of the Sith tradition. The apprentice would crave that power study. It resent it, and in time, destroy the master only when the apprentice had surpassed the master in strength, cunning, and understanding of the dark side. Would that final betrayal be permitted, even encouraged? Over time, this cycle was meant to refine the Sith line. Each generation tested in secrecy, rather than on the open battlefield where Jedi and Republic fleets could intervene. Bane believed that for the next 1,000 years, this ruthless succession would create Sith who were not only more powerful in the Force, but also colder, more strategic, less prone to the theatrical wars that had doomed their predecessors. This new order demanded absolute secrecy. There would be no Grand Sith Empire on the galactic maps, no crimson banners over Coruscant, no public war against the Jedi. Instead, the two Sith would move through the shadows as merchant senators, either crime lords or anonymous scholars. They would manipulate governments, destabilize economies, and quietly steer conflicts from behind the scenes while the Jedi watched the front lines. The true danger would stand behind them. In plain sight, Bane's model was a deliberate inversion of the old Sith empires. Those earlier regimes had carved their presence into worlds like Korriban and Zeost, with towering temples and massed armies. Their power had been obvious, and so the Republic and the Jedi had eventually united to crush them. The rule of two rejected that visibility. It turned the Sith from conquerors into infiltrators, from warlords into architects of galactic events. Over centuries, this hidden lineage treated the galaxy as a Dejeric board, each apprentice learning not only how to wield a blade or channel the Force, but how to read senates, corporations, and even the Jedi Council itself. What they found there would change everything. Complacency, corruption, fear, all waiting to be used, and somewhere, in that long, unbroken chain of master and apprentice, a quiet decision was made to focus on one particular Republic, one particular Chancellor, and one vulnerable Skywalker. The patient rule that began with Bane was about to step out of the shadows, but not all at once, and not in the way the Jedi expected. In the shadows of the Republic, silent Sith, unwitting Jedi, for nearly a millennium after Bane, that quiet decision became a discipline. The Sith learned to move as shadows within shadows. Power no longer announced itself with crimson banners and fleets. Instead, it whispered in council chambers, in banking halls, in back rooms thick with smoke and secrets. What followed was an age where the rule of two traded open war for patient infiltration for the next 1,000 years. Masters and apprentices abandoned the image of the conquering warlord. They became advisors to planetary rulers, trusted confidants who nudged legislation. A sentence at a time, they became financiers whose private ledgers hid the funding of mercenary armies and covert laboratories. Some wore the mask of crime lords running syndicates on worlds the Republic considered peripheral, unimportant. All the while, information flowed upward to a single master and downward to a single apprentice. Around this same era, the Jedi Order believed the opposite was true. After Ruusan, the Jedi declared, the Sith destroyed their academies, taught that the Dark Empire had been annihilated, its remnants scattered its teachings, broken. The story of the Sith became a cautionary tale rather than an active threat over time. That certainty hardened into quiet arrogance. The Order shifted from a warrior brotherhood on the front lines to a respected arm of galactic governance. In the calm that followed the new Sith Wars, the Jedi disarmed themselves in more ways than one. They reduced their standing armies, trusted in Republic law and procedure, and embraced a role as diplomats and investigators. The Force still guided them, but their gaze turned outward toward obvious conflict and visible danger. Subtle distortions in trade policy or judicial precedent felt beneath their concern that complacency would shape everything that came after. During those long centuries, each Sith pair treated the galaxy as an inheritance. A master might spend a lifetime cultivating a single sector, embedding agents in customs offices and port authorities. An apprentice would then inherit those assets, expand them, bind them with new debts and new secrets. What they found there would change everything, not through sudden conquest, but through compound influence. A bribe here, a blackmail file there, a quiet favor called in 20 years later over generations. This created a web of control that spanned corporations, crime families, and intelligence services. One master might specialize in corrupting a religious movement, another in destabilizing border defenses, another in studying the very nature of the Force itself. All of it logged, remembered, passed on in whispers. From dying master to rising apprentice, the rule of two became a ledger of grudges and opportunities written across galactic history. Eventually, this slow accumulation of power converged on the Republic's core worlds. One Sith line produced Darth Plagueis, a master obsessed with the deep mechanics of life and death. Another produced Darth Sidious, a politician whose public face radiated civility, while the dark side coiled beneath. Together, they represented the culmination of that hidden millennium. Their schemes would reach into the Senate, the courts, the banks, and the Jedi Temple itself, setting the stage for the quiet era of shadows to erupt into open war once more. From Bane to Sidious, a continuous line of darkness power can be sudden and explosive. But what happens when that power is passed down in whispers, from master to apprentice? For generations, the answer is the hidden lineage of the Sith, from Darth Bane to Darth Sidious, a single thread of darkness running quietly through galactic history. While individual names fade into obscurity, the chain itself endures in the centuries after Bane. What followed was not a parade of famous conquerors, but a careful relay of secrets. Many of the Sith who carried the rule of two forward remain unnamed in any surviving record. Some are hinted at in legends, others exist only as gaps between known masters and apprentices. Yet the important truth is simple. The line was never broken. Each master chose a single heir, taught forbidden knowledge, and then was eventually replaced, often violently, over time. The focus of this secret empire shifted. Bane had already turned away from the chaotic warlord model, favoring patience and strategy. Later generations pushed this even further. They refined arts of concealment, masking their presence in the Force until even Jedi Masters could stand beside them and sense nothing. They studied languages of law and commerce as carefully as ancient Sith runes. They learned that a signature on a trade charter could sometimes wield more power than a fleet in open conflict. By the last centuries of the Republic, the Sith had learned to treat the Republic itself as a weapon instead of assaulting the Senate. They infiltrated it instead of destroying banks. They guided them from the shadows. They discovered that the Jedi Order's rigid adherence to tradition could be turned against it. Rules that once preserved discipline now created blind spots. Councils debated while politicians were bought, investigations stalled while evidence was quietly redirected. Bureaucracy became a shield for the dark side among these hidden lords figures, such as Darth Plagueis, stand out not as isolated monsters, but as products of this long refinement. Plagueis devoted himself to deep experiments in life and death, probing the Force for ways to command midi-chlorians and cheat mortality. At the same time, he mastered galactic finance, manipulating interstellar banks and corporations to create dependence on Sith-controlled credit. His work was not meant to win a single battle. It was meant to prepare the conditions for a final takeover. The story of this lineage reaches its perfection in Darth Sidious. By his era, the Sith had honed the art of disguise to a razor's edge. Sidious could appear as a loyal public servant, a humble senator, and later a trusted chancellor, while the dark side coiled unseen beneath his calm exterior. This was the culmination of Bane's vision. For the next 1,000 years, the Sith had trained to smile in public while engineering collapse in private. And the Republic stood on the brink of discovering that truth too late. Convergence with the films, the Sith return. From the perspective of the Jedi, from the outside, the final centuries of the Republic appeared peaceful. The Jedi believed the dark side had been pushed to the margins of galactic history. The Sith Empire was gone. Its banners shattered, its temples buried in sand. The Council taught that the Sith had been extinct for 1,000 years, their last open war ending with the reforms that created the modern Republic. Around 32 years before the Battle of Yavin, that certainty cracked on a remote trade world when Darth Maul stepped out of the shadows on Tatooine. The Jedi had no living memory of a true Sith Lord in motion. Their archives spoke of armies and empires, not a lone assassin painted in red and black for the Council. This was an anomaly, a disturbing echo, rather than proof of a surviving order from the Sith perspective. What followed was not a return, but the next move in a plan that had been maturing for generations. Maul's emergence coincided with a political crisis on Naboo, a manufactured conflict engineered by Sidious from both sides. As Darth Sidious, he directed the Trade Federation's blockade as Senator Palpatine. He posed as the planet's desperate advocate. This dual role would shape every step of the Republic's response. The story of Naboo was a test of methods refined over time. The Sith had learned that grand fleets and open war only rallied the Jedi and the Republic together. The rule of two demanded a quieter path divide and rule, instead of frontal assault, legal procedure, instead of invasion proclamations of emergency. Instead of martial conquest, the suffering of one world became the lever to move the entire Senate. When the Clone Wars erupted, years later, the Jedi believed they were confronting a separatist movement backed by a mysterious Sith mastermind. In truth, both the Grand Army of the Republic and the separatist droid legions served the same hidden master. Sidious had turned lessons from ancient Sith empires into something more elegant than any previous war. He weaponized fear of collapse to centralize power around the Chancellor, while keeping the Jedi on the front lines, far from Coruscant. The irony was devastating. For thousands of years, the Jedi had prepared to face legions of Sith, not two patient conspirators operating in secret. There was no vast Sith empire to repel, no dark crusade sweeping across the stars, only Sidious and his chosen apprentice moving pieces on a Dejeric board. The Order had spent centuries watching the horizon for a storm and never noticed the lightning gathering at its feet. Order 66 revealed the terrible success of Bane's design. With a single command, the Guardians of Peace were branded traitors and executed by soldiers bred to trust them. The rule of two, born from ancient failure, had achieved what no open Sith empire ever could: total control of the galaxy through legal authority, applause, and fear. Yet even at the height of triumph, another pattern was quietly forming around a boy from Tatooine. and a bond that the dark side could not fully erase. Cycles of rise and fall, the Sith as a single endless story. At first, it seemed that the rule of two had broken the ancient pattern. The Sith no longer marched beneath crimson banners, no longer carved an open empire across the stars. Instead, they wore the face of the Republic and hid their war behind smiles and Senate decrees. Yet beneath this new disguise, the same old rhythm continued to pulse, a quiet drumbeat in galactic history. The story of the Sith across millennia can be heard as a single repeating cadence. It begins with a wound, a schism in belief, when Jedi turn toward the dark side, convinced that the Force is meant to be mastered rather than obeyed. The first exiles on Korriban were only the earliest verse of this song. Their rebellion in the 100-year darkness, their defeat at Korbos, their banishment into the unknown, all of it would shape what followed as they stepped onto that red desert world. And what they found, they would change everything over time. The pattern became clear. Exile became empire on Korriban and Zeost. The Dark Jedi discovered the ancient Sith species, already steeped in dark rituals and hungry gods. The conquerors and the conquered fused into one culture, ruled by Dark Lords who believed that passion and conflict were the engines of power. For thousands of years, their empire grew in isolation, building obsidian temples and deep tombs where the living and the dead both whispered to the dark side. Then came Overreach, Naga Sado, using illusion and alchemy to ignite the great Hyperspace War. His fleets surging into Republic space, convinced that fear alone would break the light side, but internal betrayal shattered his campaign, and the first Sith Empire collapsed. Its worlds scoured its people, scattered yet even in ruin. The cycle refused to end. Survivors fled into unknown regions. Spirits lingered in burial chambers, and artifacts waited in forgotten vaults for new hands. What followed was reinvention. Frieden Nad, hearing those whispers on Korriban and carrying them to Onderon Exar, reshaping Sith teachings into a new crusade. Revan and Malak wielding a Starforge to birth another war. Each generation repeated the rhythm schism from the Jedi rise to power a new empire. Order a moment of terrifying dominance, then the inevitable fracture and fall. The names changed, but the melody stayed the same. Through Darthbane, the cycle narrowed, but did not break. The Brotherhood of Darkness died on Ruusan, yet its ashes birthed the Rule of Two, a smaller, colder version of the old Dream Master and Apprentice, instead of Legion's secrecy, instead of banners. But the themes endured the lure of forbidden knowledge, the belief that strength justified domination, the conviction that the dark side was freedom from fear. Even as every empire crumbled, the idea of the Sith survived. In this way, the centuries begin to blur. The Great Hyperspace War, the Great Sith War, the New Sith Wars, the Clone Wars, each another dark tide rising and receding until the Sith become less a sequence of separate regimes and more a single river flowing through galactic time. And now, as that river bends toward Endor, and a final confrontation between master, apprentice, father and son, the old pattern drifts quietly into place once more. The Sith as a thread through time, from Korriban to the Skywalkers, and from that bend in the river, the current can be followed backward and forward at once, from the red sands of Korriban to the burning forests of Endor, from forgotten kings to a single family name. Skywalker. The story of the Sith becomes a thread through time, more than a sequence of separate empires on Korriban. The line begins in shadow among the tombs of Ajuntapal and Marka Ragnos. The air is still and heavy with the dark side. The stone remembers ancient coronations and duels in the Valley of the Dark Lords. One monument leads to another, Ragnos to Naga Sado, Sado to the shattered aftermath of the Great Hyperspace War. Each crypt, a quiet promise that power once taken is never truly gone. Only waiting over time, that promise finds new vessels centuries after Sado's fall. Darth Revan studies the same currents of fear and ambition that once drove the old Sith Empire, his war against the Republic, his use of the Starforge, his fall, and redemption all echo. those first exiled Jedi who chose domination over restraint. What followed was another broken empire, and yet another lesson that the Sith refused to learn. In the ruins of those lessons, Darth Bane appears at the end of the New Sith Wars, standing amid the ashes of the Brotherhood of Darkness. He understands that endless armies only invite annihilation, so he forges the rule of two. One master, one apprentice hidden in the shadows for the next 1,000 years. This quiet decision would shape everything that comes after the Jedi believed the Sith extinct. But in truth, the dark side has simply changed its mask. From Bane's secret lineage, the thread winds through nameless masters and ambitious apprentices until it reaches Naboo and Coruscant, and a patient politician called Palpatine Darth Sidious is the culmination of every Sith before him. The ancient sorcery of Korriban, the grand strategies of Sado, the manipulative genius of Revan, the ruthless clarity of Bane distilled into one. Being his Clone War is only the latest expression of an old pattern. Jedi against Sith Republic, against Empire Father, against Son through Anakin Skywalker. That pattern pierces directly into the heart of the saga. Fear of loss, passion for control, the desperate wish to bend the galaxy and the Force itself away from death. These are not new flaws. They are the same temptations whispered in Sith tombs for thousands of years. And when Luke stands before his father and the Emperor, the weight of Korriban Ziost, Malachor, and Ruusan all hangs unspoken in the air. Sidious falls, the second Death Star burns, and yet the ideas that sustain the Sith remain: the fear of chaos, the hunger for order, the belief that power can end suffering if only it is ruthless enough. Let these connections drift now to the edges of awareness, distant constellations of memory, as the long night of galactic history moves gently toward its closing chapters. Drifting into sleep, letting the dark timeline fade to silence. As those last connections fade, the great machinery of Sith ambition grows quiet. The roaring engines of war cool to embers, and the vast galactic stage that once shook with conflict becomes distant scenery. A long, slow exhale after a story of darkness told from beginning to end. Over time, the sharp edges of each era soften. The first schism within the Jedi Order becomes a distant murmur, a handful of frustrated visionaries reaching for more power than the Council would allow. Cast into exile, they stumbled through unknown stars until they reached Korriban. What they found there would change everything. A red desert world already steeped in the dark side, ruled by the ancient Sith species, ready to be claimed and transformed. From that meeting of exiles and natives, an empire rose, and for thousands of years it knew only the language of conquest and fear. Dark Lords carved their names into stone and into memory: Marka Ragnos, Naga, Sado Tulak Horde. Yet even at their height, the seeds of collapse waited. Within them, jealousy and rivalry turned outward against the Republic in the Great Hyperspace War, and inward against each other until the first Sith Empire burned away, leaving only ruins and whispers. What followed was a pattern that would shape the rest of Sith history: hidden survival, followed by sudden return each time the dark side found a new vessel. Freedom Nad brooding over Onderon Exarchun, walking the halls of Yavin, 4 Revan, and Malak, bending fleets to their will through the Starforge. Each resurgence promised final victory. Each ended in ashes. The Sith shattered again, but never erased. Over the next 1,000 years, the same cycle continued: armies and brotherhoods rising in the new Sith Wars, consuming entire sectors, then collapsing under the weight of their own hatred, until one survivor, Darth Bane, stepped out of the wreckage and chose a different path. No more legions, no more open banners, only the rule of two: master and apprentice, a quiet venom flowing beneath the surface of galactic history. From that moment, the Sith became a thread of shadow woven through centuries, almost invisible, yet always present, plotting within the Republic, whispering at the edges of the Jedi Order, watching the Clone Wars ignite and the Empire rise, until Sidious and Vader stood as the final expression of that hidden lineage, then fell in turn, as all Sith do now. That thread grows dim in the mind, the long corridor from Korriban's tombs to the second Death Star's fall, stretches out behind and recedes. Each wall, each betrayal, each desperate grasp for power becomes a soft echo instead of a wound. There are no more twists waiting, no more revelations ahead, only the gentle silence after the tale has ended. The story of the Sith for tonight is complete. The dark side's long arc has been traced from first rebellion to final downfall. If this slow passage through empires and ages has brought rest, other quiet journeys through the Force await on other nights. For now let the last images sink. Beneath awareness, let the galaxy drift back into darkness and sleep.